Elara gripped the locket. The metal turned hot against her skin, a small, solid weight in her hand. She stood at the threshold of the Whispering Woods, where the manicured grass of the castle grounds met the tangled, ancient roots of the trees. Behind her, the gates were still visible, tall and silent. Before her, the forest stretched into a deep velvet purple as the afternoon light drained from the sky. She took a breath, the air cooling rapidly as it drifted out from between the trunks. She looked back once, watching the long shadows of the spires stretch across the lawn. Her grip tightened on the locket. She knew what lay ahead, or at least, she knew she had to find it. With a sharp intake of breath, Elara turned away from the safety of the stone walls. She took a single, deliberate step into the shade. Then another. The tall grass crunched under her boots, yielding to the damp, soft soil of the woods. The trees leaned inward, their branches interlocking overhead to block out the remaining sky. She did not look back again. She walked forward until the castle was nothing but a memory at her spine, and the dark, twisting path became the only reality. She counted her steps to track the distance. 10 paces into the thicket. Then 20. The air grew heavy and damp, smelling of crushed pine and wet earth. A soft, luminescent glow began to pulse beneath her boots, spreading rapidly across the forest floor. She paused, feeling the ground soften as a thick, velvet carpet of moss bloomed over the trail she had just traveled. She turned around to check her bearings. The path was gone. Where there had been a clear way back, there was now only a solid wall of ancient growth. She shifted her weight, the moss squelching quietly under her feet. She walked faster, pushing through a screen of low-hanging branches, but the forest seemed to stretch, expanding with every stride she took. She stopped again. The silence was absolute. No birds, no wind, just the sound of her own pulse thumping in her ears. She spun in a slow circle, eyes straining to find a familiar landmark, but every trunk looked identical to the last. The shadows deepened, pressing in from the periphery until the space around her felt smaller, tighter, and entirely unfamiliar. She was no longer just in the woods. She was enclosed by them, the silence shattered. A low, guttural growl vibrated through the damp air, starting deep in the earth and rising until it echoed off the hollow trunks. Elara spun toward the sound, her boots scraping against the moss. Behind a rotted, hollow log, the darkness shifted. 2 yellow eyes sparked in the dim light. A large badger shoved its way into the narrow space between the trees. It moved with a heavy, deliberate gait, claws digging deep into the soil. It stopped 10 feet away. The creature bared its teeth, long and sharp, emitting a steady, rhythmic hiss that pulled the remaining warmth from the air. Elara froze. The muscles in her legs locked, then began to tremble uncontrollably. Her knees knocked together, a sharp, rhythmic sound that seemed deafening in the stillness. She stopped breathing, her ribs tight, her eyes fixed on the animal's powerful, hunched shoulders. Every instinct screamed for her to run, but her feet remained rooted to the ground. She was trapped between the encroaching shadows and the weight of the beast. The badger took another step forward, its head low, its snout twitching as it tasted the air. Fear surged, sharp and cold, as the reality of the encounter took hold. The badger paused, its nose working rapidly. Elara watched the beast, her breath coming in ragged, shallow hitches. She forced her right hand toward her pocket, moving with agonizing slowness to avoid triggering a strike. Her fingers closed around a handful of dried berries. She withdrew her hand and held it out, palm flat and trembling. The badger tilted its head, eyes narrowing as it tracked the movement. It took a single heavy step forward, then another. Elara did not blink. She kept her arm steady, though the muscles in her shoulder ached from the strain. The animal stopped inches from her hand. It reached out, whiskers brushing against her skin, and inhaled deeply. Then, with a sudden, gentle motion, it took the berries from her palm. The tension in the air snapped. The badger chewed once, twice, and looked up at her. It turned, trotting back into the dark, but stopped after a few paces to look back over its shoulder. It huffed, a soft, inviting sound. Elara exhaled, her knees finally steadying, and took a tentative step to follow the creature into the deep woods. The badger led the way through a thicket of thorns until the sound of rushing water drowned out the wind. They emerged at the bank of a river. The old wooden bridge had collapsed, leaving only splintered beams jutting out over the white foam. On the far side, a tiny bird sat huddled against a rock. It chirped, a thin, frantic sound. Its wing was snagged in a mass of thick, thorny vines. Elara looked at the water. It surged against the banks, dark and fast. She stepped off the mud and into the current. The cold hit her like a physical blow, numbing her feet instantly. She took a step, then another, hands outstretched for balance. Beneath the surface, a moss-covered stone shifted. Her boot slid. She plunged forward, her hands slapping into the freezing spray. She gasped, the shock driving the air from her lungs. She forced herself up, water dripping from her hair, and surged toward the far bank. Her teeth chattered as she reached the bird. The creature was small, its chest heaving in rapid, shallow bursts. Elara knelt in the shallows, the current pulling at her knees, and focused on the vine pinning the bird to the rock. Elara braced her feet against the slick riverbed and brought her hands to the vine. The thorns were sharp, biting into her fingertips, but she did not pull away. She twisted the vine, feeling the tension of the fibers against the bird's fragile wing. With one sharp, deliberate tug, the vine snapped. The bird fluttered free, chirping a high, clear note. It took flight, circling her head once, twice, before landing on a nearby branch. From the bank, the badger let out a low, vibrating hoot that seemed to ripple through the ground. The trees responded. A deep, resonant hum started in the roots, growing until the very air felt thick and charged. Below the surface of the moss, tiny flickers of light began to pulse. Then they erupted. 1,000 fireflies rose from the soil in a single, glowing cloud. They swirled around Elara, ignoring the dark, and began to assemble. They wove themselves into a solid, golden tunnel that stretched forward through the shadows of the woods. The path ahead, once buried in gloom, was now bathed in a steady, brilliant light. Elara looked at the bird, then at the badger, and stepped toward the glowing archway. Elara stepped into the golden corridor. The fireflies drifted like embers in a draught, illuminating the path with a pulsing, rhythmic warmth. The badger trotted firmly to her left, its claws clicking against the forest floor, while the bird remained perched on her shoulder, its small weight a constant, steady presence. Every step she took felt lighter than the last. The tunnel narrowed as they moved deeper, the density of the light shifting from a soft glow to a bright, focused beam. For a moment, the trees seemed to lean in, blocking the way. But the badger nudged a hidden gap in the roots, and the light flared wide again. She moved with renewed purpose, the fatigue of the river crossing replaced by a steady, driving rhythm in her stride. The air grew clearer, losing the scent of damp earth and replacing it with the crisp, cooling breeze of the open fields. She looked ahead through the shimmering archway of insects and saw them. In the far distance, the castle spires caught the light, glowing like beacons against the darkening sky. She did not stop. She pushed forward, the badger at her side, and the bird singing a low, steady melody that propelled her toward the edge of the woods. The final tree line broke away, and the open expanse of the castle grounds stretched before her. Elara ran. Her breath came in sharp, steady gasps as she closed the distance to the stone walls. High above, on the balcony, two figures held torches aloft, the flames dancing against the twilight. She reached the heavy iron gate, her hand finding the cold metal of the handle. Before she pushed, she turned back. The woods were no longer the suffocating, dark tangle she had entered hours before. They stood transformed, radiating a soft, steady pulse of golden light that pushed back the shadows. The fireflies had settled into the canopy, turning the forest into a glowing, silent sanctuary. She touched the locket at her neck, feeling the warmth of the metal against her skin. She had gone in afraid, but she stood now with a quiet, grounded strength. The badger gave one last hoot, and the bird took flight, circling the castle spires. Elara pushed the gate open. The sound of the hinges echoed in the stillness. She stepped across the threshold, felt the stone floor beneath her feet, and moved toward the light of the torches. She was home.